biblical story is giving us a really robust depiction of spiritual evil and how it's fully intertwined with human rebellion and evil.
A term like fallen angels makes us think of demons like the ones Jesus cast out. But the rebels of Genesis 6 are imprisoned, so they can't be the demons Jesus encountered. So where did they come from?
The point is that Jesus sees himself stepping into this drama between this battle of two realms. And that explains all of his exorcisms and why that was such a big deal to him.
Like, all of the problems that generate out of the Bible come from this. Like, we can't trust God's generosity, like his timing and means.
Welcome to another episode of Ring Them Bells. I'm going to take a second and ask you to subscribe. This is something really small for you, but it means a lot for the message and scope of this channel. If you can slap that like button, share this content out, make sure you're subscribed, turn on the alerts. All these little things help us get the message out about the good news about what God has done for this world.
Understanding Genesis 1 and the concept of the cosmos that it's trying to invite us into is crucial. Actually, none of the biblical story will make sense if you don't understand the shape of the cosmos that's laid out in Genesis 1. First off, Genesis 1 is actually not Genesis 1. It's Genesis 1, verse 1 to 2, verse 3. And just on page 1, our medieval scholars botched the literary units. And so it's kind of unfortunate. So, but it's not that big of a deal because you can still see that the author has repeated all of the words of the opening lines of Genesis 1, and repeated them in the closing lines of Genesis 2, verses 1 through 3. If you do a comparison, it's like a bookend around the 6 days that are in the middle of the two bookends. So what's important for understanding the spiritual realm is, Genesis 1 opens with darkness and wilderness, wild and waste, and then these waters, these dark waters. And we won't get into all of the debates that unfold from there. But what happens, that everybody agrees on, is God speaks over a series of 7 days. He speaks 10 times over the course of 7 days. And the first 6 days, their literary design is really important. The first thing that God does is do 3 acts of separating that take the darkness and the waters and to begin to split them into ordered realms. So he splits light from dark, the waters from the waters, and then the land from the waters as the dry land emerges. That's days 1, 2, and 3. And so what happens, days 1 through 3 is about God creating these realms. So you have the realm of time, or the order of time, which we don't think of as a place, but it's different for the biblical authors. Day 2 is about those waters, those dark waters get split in half. And this is a very common ancient Near Eastern creation motif that the biblical author is developing and actually kind of polemicizing, doing a little trash talk against. But that's a whole other conversation.
Oh, yeah.
But the splitting of the waters is something that God does without any effort, just with his word. Whereas Marduk, the patron god of Babylon, he almost died trying to split the waters, and he was barely able to do it with all of his strength. Anyhow, so but what that gives you is the waters below and the waters above, which are called, the waters above are called sky. And then you get, on day 3, you get the land. That's days 1 through 3. So what happens on days 4, 5, and 6 is that you now have these 3 realms. You have the waters above, you have the sky, then you have the land, and then the waters below. It's a 3-tiered cosmos. And what happens on days 4, 5, and 6 is the order returns, and God begins to fill each of those unique realms with inhabitants. So he places inhabitants in the skies. They're called lamps. In Hebrew, it's the word ma'or. It's the same word used for the lamp in the tabernacle. Places the lamps up in the sky. And it never uses the word sun or moon. It just uses the words big lamp and small lamp. And then also the stars. The stars just get a passing mention. So you get big lamp, little lamp. And the big lamp rules over the day, and the little lamp rules over the night. Okay, that's important. So they're up there, and the thing that God was doing, separating day and night, which God did on day one, he gives that responsibility now over to these lamps. He says they are the ones who are now going to separate day and night. Day 5, God put sky flyers who fly against the waters above, and then the water swarmers who swim in the waters beneath. And then day 6, you get the land. So you can just see you're just systematically working through the 3 tiers of the cosmos. And on land, there's two sets of creatures. There's the land creatures and beasts and crawlers and so on. And then the last kind of pinnacle creature is humans, who are God's image. And God tells them to rule as his image on the land. So notice that symmetry between the inhabitants in the skies above, who rule over day and night, and then there's the land dwellers who rule over the land. Do you see that? So that's an important pairing or symmetry. There's the rulers above, and there's the rulers below. And they're each given their own realms of responsibility. The rulers above do stuff that rulers above do. They guard the order of time. They're markers. The rulers below don't belong up in the sky. They belong on the land, because there they image and reflect God, who is above the heavens of the heavens, as Solomon says in 1 Kings 8. And so you have this symmetry right there in Genesis 1 between these rulers above and rulers below. And then what you get after those 6 days is a little summary statement that says, and thus were finished the skies and the land and all of their, and the word is hosts. And you maybe know that phrase from the Lord of Hosts, or in older translations, it's the Lord's Sabaoth. It's just spelling the Hebrew word with English letters. But the word hosts is, and so it's really important. It's right there in Genesis 2, verse 1, the hosts above of heaven and the hosts of the land below. Now, I'm pretty sure host of heaven might trigger some associations in our minds. They're the ones singing, on all our Christmas cards, the host of heaven. They're the ones singing when Jesus is born. So the host of the skies is the standard biblical term that's going to be used for these figures called Elohim, or the sons of Elohim, spiritual beings. And so the worldview is actually right there in Genesis 1. There is a heavenly realm that's above and transcendent, and it has different kinds of inhabitants than here on the land below. And heaven and earth are mirrors of each other in Genesis 1. The rulers below mirror the rulers above, and who rules over all of them? It's the creator of all things. And so the biblical authors don't spend a lot of time here, but that realm above and its inhabitants just hum in the background as you go on into the rest of the biblical story. But every once in a while, these characters from that parallel realm, so to speak, pop onto the main stage. And so we could talk about those, but this was so helpful for me to see this is the cosmos that the biblical authors are inviting us into. Genesis 1 is using vertical spatial language to talk about these two parallel realms, right? Heaven, the heavens above. And that's going to continue right out throughout the biblical story. However, the biblical authors are going to go on to nuance and show that heaven and earth, even though there's the spatial words like up and down, the biblical authors have a way more sophisticated view of these two parallel realms, because heaven and earth can overlap in the same exact space. Like in Jacob's dream, where he wakes up, where he has this vision or dream, and he sees heaven and earth are connected by this stairway, ramp. And he sees the host of heaven going up and down, traffic between heaven and earth. So the temples, high places, mountains, Eden, these are all places where heaven and earth are the same thing, the same place. And And so earthly characters can encounter heaven and its inhabitants right here on earth. And so that, gets us into a whole kind of other set of questions. It's really cool. But it continues into the New Testament. Paul the Apostle talks about the powers and principalities and rulers that are in the heavenly realms. But then he'll also use those same titles to talk about people and institutions that he sees around him on earth. And so it's a pretty sophisticated view of two parallel realities. And one of them is seen and visible, and the other one is hazy and not always visible to us. But there are moments where we can encounter that heavenly reality right here.
The biblical story is giving us a really robust depiction of spiritual evil and how it's fully intertwined with human rebellion and evil. It's easy to reject a lot of this for modern readers because they associate it with, Satanism or witchcraft or something with a pentagram on it. And that's not what the biblical authors are trying to say. The twin spiritual human rebellion of Babylon is a political, economic system. It's a cultural system. In the book of Revelation, Babylon is talked about as being the merchant of the whole world, the economic engine of the whole world, including slavery. And that's what gets brought down, when Babylon falls. And so the biblical authors want us to imagine that we're all inhabiting cultural systems that are participating in a human spiritual rebellion, but also on a personal level. When I entertain, when I dehumanize someone else as my tribe superior to you, you're less human, you probably don't deserve to be here. Which no one, well, maybe some people say that out loud, but none of us like to think that we think that way.
Yeah, but we all do.
But we all think that way a lot more at the time than we're willing to admit. And the biblical authors would say we are participating in dragging the world back into death and chaos.
The amount of death I will allow in the world around me and in others so that I can enjoy something.
Correct. Yeah.
When I stop and really appraise that, it's pretty startling.
It is startling.
And we all
disturbing.
We all do that.
That's right. So and this is, when you read the Gospels, this is what Jesus was constantly talking about.
Yeah.
This is why he didn't start a revolutionary war against Rome.
Because Rome was captive to something greater.
Yeah, he went out to the desert for 40 days to conquer the real enemy that was tempting him to take the kingdom of God over the world, but through violent force.
Yeah.
And he resisted that, and he went about confronting a spiritual enemy that had captured a lot of people's bodies and minds and hearts. When he was in the Garden of Gethsemane in the Gospel of Luke, and he's getting arrested, he calls it, "This is the time for the power of the dark." That's what he says. He allows the power of the darkness to overcome him.
Like, look at Cain and Abel, and let's use them as a pattern of the older and the younger, the more powerful and the less powerful, the one that should be chosen, the one that's lesser. And now let's take that back to the first iteration, which is the spiritual beings and humans.
Yep, that's right. And the animals and the humans.
Yeah, and the animals and humans.
Because both animals and the heavenly rulers come before humans in the 7-day creation narrative.
Yeah. So the animal thing, that's interesting. I'll leave it aside. Let's just talk about the relationship between the spiritual beings.
Sure.
The firstborn of God's creation, in a sense.
Yeah.
The first ones given authority to
rule,
to have dominion in the skies over time and seasons. And that whole idea of these glorious, divine, spiritual beings and their power in the heavens that God gives them. First, before then day 6, dirt creatures, God gives and elevates us to be his image. And what we talked about is how these Second Temple texts and also other parts of the Hebrew Bible, it starts to kind of illuminate, and you think about how it was envy of us, the spiritual beings, feeling like, man, these creatures don't deserve such a high status. Why is God showing favor on them? Why is God's face on them more than us. Like, this is ridiculous. And in a way, then you can kind of replay the Cain and Abel story
Yes.
with the spiritual beings. And I wonder, can you imagine God going to a spiritual being and saying, like, hey, why are you angry? Like, do what is right, and won't you also be exalted? And there's this idea that in the whole fabric of the cosmos, all of God's creatures, like, he wants to elevate everyone in their place. And there's enough for everyone. There's enough for the spiritual beings and for humanity and for the animals and for all of God's creation. And the problem is we can't, we just don't trust that that's true.
Yeah, that's right.
Humans and spiritual beings. And we get scandalized when we don't think it's being like mediated out in a way that
Distributed equally.
Yeah.
or distributed equally on the timeline that we think is like right and just.
the timeline, and also in the manner of being like, hey, we're first and we're more powerful.
Yes. Yeah,
You should be like favoring us and everything would be better. Why are you like focusing on these dirt creatures?
Yeah.
That's scandalous. And so, like, all of the problems that generate out of the Bible come from this. Like, we can't trust God's generosity, like his timing and means.
Eden was the home and headquarters of God. His supernatural and earthly families resided there. God wanted them to image him in their own ways. Heaven and earth blended together into one family. But one family member didn't like that idea.
We've all heard about the serpent in Eden, but why a serpent? What's that supposed to tell us? Ancient people knew how to take this scene, but we don't. We assume the serpent is merely an animal. His form is important, but the story is not about zoology. The story is about a supernatural rebellion. Isaiah alludes to that rebellion.
I will raise up my throne above the stars of God, and I will sit on the mountain of assembly. I will make myself like the Most High.
Isaiah is talking about the sons of God in the assembly. Just like Job, he refers to them as stars. They were present before Eden. Ezekiel 28 mentions the rebellion in Eden as well. In Ezekiel's case, a guardian cherub gets kicked out of Eden.
You were an anointed guardian cherub, and I placed you on God's holy mountain. You walked in the midst of stones of fire.
Ancient Mesopotamian tablets talk about cherub throne guardians and describe them as snakes and dragons. The serpent of Eden was actually a supernatural being whose job was to guard God's throne. An ancient person would have known the scene was about a rebel in the divine council.
What is important is that the Hebrew Bible, when you're in the narrative world, you're hearing a story, that goes from the beginning on into Israel's story into the Second Temple period. But the formation of that collection of the Hebrew Bible took place over a very long course of many generations. And each generation, receiving what came before, was praying and meditating on the traditions they received as they were having the new experiences of God's purposes in their history. And as those new experiences became part of the tradition, then that was added to what was meditated upon and all collected together. So that when you read the Hebrew Bible as a whole, when we read the garden narratives, you're meant to read them with an eye, and they are designed in the shape they are now with an eye towards everything that's coming, which involves a lot of meditation on the powers above and human powers below. So that by the time you get to Daniel, for example, Daniel has a fully worked out view of all of these things, and it's exactly what you're saying. Like, there's rebel powers above, there's rebel powers below, and they're linked.
Yeah.
They're linked, the heavenly rulers and the earthly rulers, which is why you've got heavenly princes of Persia, that are resisting Michael the archangel, and they're parallel to Nebuchadnezzar and Darius, the kings of Babylon and Persia, who are resisting God's human partners, Israel on earth. And it's all like a mirror of each other.
The authors of Scripture believed the gods of the nations were real. Look at Psalm 82 carefully.
God stands in the divine assembly. He administers judgment in the midst of the gods.
When you really look at Psalm 82:1, it's kind of shocking. But there it is, plain as day. God presides over an assembly of gods that he calls his sons. We're just not used to thinking of the heavenly host in those terms, but that's what the Hebrew text says. Psalm 89 says the same thing about God's counsel in the heavens.
A God feared greatly in the council of the holy ones.
The Hebrew word translated gods in Psalm 82 is Elohim. Now, most of the time, it should be translated as capital G, God. But sometimes it's plural. And Psalm 82:1 has both. The problem for us is that we think this is a problem for monotheism, but it's not. We're taught to associate the letters G, O, and D with a specific set of unique attributes. That's why putting an S on the end makes us queasy. But the word Elohim is not about a set of unique attributes. The Bible itself tells us that.
Elohim is simply a word used to describe a supernatural being. It says nothing about attributes. That's why the biblical writers used Elohim for other spirit beings besides God. It's used for the gods of the nations, it's used for demons, it's used for angels, even the disembodied human dead. However, Yahweh is one of those Elohim, and no other Elohim is like him. I repeat, no other Elohim is like him. The Bible describes him in unique ways. There is only one of him, existing as three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And he is the creator of all other Elohim.
So when we get to the Gospels, there's been so much meditation on that's why the Gospels present Jesus' conflict with the rulers of Jerusalem as a conflict with the snake, which is what Jesus' testing in the wilderness was all about, and why it was framed as he's an Israelite replaying Israel's history, like the 40 years in the wilderness and his 40 days. And he's like David, King David, overcoming the temptations and failures of King David. But he's also like a new human. He's a new Adam, resisting the deceit of the snake in the garden. He's all of it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what you just made a connection that was helpful too is that reminding us the rulers above and the rulers below aren't like two separate stories. Like
they're linked. Yeah.
They're linked. Like there's something there. Yeah, that's really fascinating.
At least for how the biblical authors see the world. I mean, it's a view of reality that I find I have had to take a lot of time and exposure to like adjust to seeing the world that way.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're linked.
Cool. Okay. And so also Jesus is casting out demons a lot.
Yeah.
And that's part of this too, right? Like he's like the fight that he's fighting is often like, sometimes it's like religious leaders and disagreements and stuff, but mostly it's with demonic powers.
Yeah. And Jesus is presented as both the son of Adam, the son of humanity. And so we track this with his genealogy, like in Luke, for example, in the last conversation, where there's this big emphasis on it was thought the son of Joseph. He was the biological son of Mary, and he was thought to be the son of Joseph, and that's why the lineage of Joseph is brought back to the son of Adam, the son of God. So he's the son of God in terms of one aspect of what that phrase means, which is to be from God.
Yeah.
But then in Jesus' baptism, he's presented as God's firstborn or God's son in an even more cosmic, eternal sense. And that's what the baptism was about. So he's both the human that we need to be the human partner that fulfills that story and promise from the early chapters of Genesis. But it turns out that the human partner that we need needs to so exceed the capacity of what humans have been capable of so far.
Yeah.
That the one who's able to do it is actually God become human in the person of the Son. And so that's how Jesus is introduced to us as the firstborn or the Son of God in the early chapters of the Gospel.
Easy to get the impression that Jesus' ministry leading up to the cross was somewhat random. But there's an important subtext to what Jesus was doing. He was outwitting the evil one. Jesus drew the battle lines when he declared,
Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be thrown out, and I, when I'm lifted up from the earth, will draw all people to myself."
Satan is the ruler of this world. He's also very clever. Satan knew that Jesus wanted as many people as possible to be part of God's family and kingdom. So he offered Jesus all the kingdoms of the world. There was just one catch.
The devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "I will give to you all these things, if you will fall down and worship me."
There's no clearer example of cosmic conflict. Satan's offer to Jesus was real. The thought of Jesus, Yahweh in the flesh, prostrate, worshiping at his feet, is his dream. He's the ultimate megalomaniac. Jesus told Satan to get lost. He knew something Satan didn't, that he was going to die and then rise again to liberate anyone who believes in him from death. God and his Son already had a plan to bring people into God's family, one that didn't involve worshiping Satan.
When Jesus had his confrontation with Satan, he didn't reveal God's plan. That plan was to reclaim the nations of the world allotted to lesser gods at Babel. Jesus didn't even tell his disciples until a very specific incident.
Jesus brought his disciples to a place called Caesarea Philippi, named after Caesar and Herod Philip. That was the Roman name. It's in an area known in the Old Testament as Bashan. Canaanites believed Bashan contained gateways to the underworld, the gates of hell. But in New Testament times, it had been the city of Panias, one of the Decapolis cities. And Pan's cave was also known as a gateway to the underworld. But why did Jesus bring them there? Because the implicit message when Peter confessed Jesus to be the Messiah, the Son of God, was Jesus is the real Messiah, the Son of God. And these statues and that emperor are so not the sons of God.
Caesarea Philippi was also located at the base of Mount Hermon. In some of the Dead Sea Scrolls from Jesus' day, Mount Hermon was the place where the fallen sons of God descended to earth before the flood. Bashan and Hermon were ground zero for the cosmic evil powers. Jesus was standing at Satan's front door when he announced the gates of hell would not withstand.
I hope you guys are enjoying this series. We have so much left to explore. I just wanted to take a quick second and ask you to subscribe. This channel is growing rapidly, and I am so grateful for the reach that God is giving it. But I pray that we can go even further with the message and the good news of what God has done for this world. So please like, please share, please subscribe. Help us get the good news out there. Let's get back to the message.
Where we left the last conversation was with the testing of Jesus in the wilderness. He overcomes that test as the Son of God. And then we were tracking with Luke's account about how he goes to his hometown and goes to synagogue gathering and he starts reading from the Isaiah scroll, a poem that's connected to a network of poems about God's servant, who's going to be highly exalted and given God's spirit like David was. And what Jesus, as the Son of God, is going to do with his cosmic authority is to go reach to the people in the lowest status in his society and community, the poor, the imprisoned, the blind, the oppressed, and elevate them. And that's the power of the firstborn, the divine firstborn at work in the world. And that's where we left it.
Which is very similar to the power of God at work in the world through the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah, exactly.
So lo and behold, God's firstborn, and we'll unpack that more, I'm sure, later.
Yeah.
Is got the same mode of interfacing with humanity while it's fractured.
Yeah.
With, again, the desire that all will be exalted, right? The desire is like, hey, if you do what is right, I want you to be exalted. But like, I'm going to favor the poor and oppressed. Like, that's where my attention is going to be right now.
Yeah, that's right. So one thing we didn't do when we concluded that story at the end of the last conversation was note what everybody says when he puts the scroll down. He puts the Isaiah scroll down, and a bunch of people were speaking really well of him. Like, ooh, what a wonderful sermon. you know. Ooh, I'm coming back next Shabbat. I want to hear this guy again. But others were saying, wait, isn't this the son of Joseph?
Yeah.
Whose son is this guy?
He's talking like he's something special, but we know who he actually is.
Totally.
He's just the
Joseph.
son of Joseph.
Yeah, Joseph, I mean, he's like from a craftsman family, you know, up here in the hills. Like,
Yeah.
which is, it's not, he's not like, that's not nothing.
Yeah.
He's a craftsman, but it's like, where does a craftsman's son get the gumption to say that he is the anointed, spirit-empowered son of God, servant to bring God's kingdom to the poor?
And this is connected to this idea that while Jesus is the true image of God, the firstborn, as he's presented in the narrative, is as an outsider and as a lesser person, like, you know, like a Samuel.
Yes, yeah.
He didn't come from priestly stock, but he's going to be elevated to be the like ruler.
Yeah. So what you have after the Nazareth moment that we just concluded is Jesus starts going out and bringing the healing power and the good news of God's kingdom to the poor. It's exactly what you get. So he walks out of the synagogue, and there's a guy who's just a wrecked human being. It says that he had the energy of an unclean spiritual being, an impure spiritual being associated with death in the underworld, and this guy's driven by something powerful and crazy.
And unclean meaning what here?
Impure, yeah. Actually, we talked about this years ago in our God series on spiritual beings.
Genesis 6 describes the second supernatural rebellion. Some of the sons of God, members of the heavenly council, transgress the boundary between heaven and earth.
The sons of God saw the daughters of humankind, that they were beautiful. The Nephilim were upon the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God went into the daughters of humankind, and they bore children to them.
Both Peter and Jude reference this story in the New Testament.
God did not spare the angels who sinned, but held them captive in Tartarus with chains of darkness and handed them over to be kept for judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah.
Jude also tells us about the judgment of these angels.
The angels who did not keep to their own domain, but deserted their proper dwelling place, he is kept in eternal bonds under deep gloom for the judgment of the great day.
Both of these writers understood that Genesis 6 recorded the second supernatural rebellion. The fallen sons of God were sent to Tartarus for their transgression. Tartarus is a Greek word for the realm of the dead, what we think of as hell. They'd stay there until the day of the Lord, at the end of days. A term like fallen angels makes us think of demons like the ones Jesus cast out. But the rebels of Genesis 6 are imprisoned, so they can't be the demons Jesus encountered. So where did they come from? The answer lies in the offspring produced by the forbidden union between the sons of God and the women in Genesis 6. Those offspring were known as the Nephilim. They were giants. Their descendants became the giant clans Moses and Joshua battled.
The Nephilim were upon the earth in those days, and also afterward.
In the books of Numbers and Deuteronomy, we learn about the giants Moses and Joshua ran into. They not only descended from the Nephilim, but they are called by other names like Anakim and the Rephaim. That last name stands out. Several Bible passages describe the dead spirits of the Rephaim in the realm of the dead, again what we would think of as hell.
Extra-biblical Jewish writers believe that demons, like those described in the Gospels, were disembodied spirits of the giants. They base this on the Bible's mention of dead Rephaim in the underworld. Jewish books like First Enoch and the Book of the Giants from the Dead Sea Scrolls make that.
Because there's kind of two rabbit holes here. One is There was a very popular tradition in Second Temple Judaism that the majority of invisible powers of evil at work here in the world, roaming around the world, is the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, the giants who were slain at the flood. And you can track with this theme. It's developed in a bunch of Jewish literature associated with Enoch, called the Books of Enoch, but also a work called Jubilees. So that's one popular belief at work, was that these are the ongoing legacy of the giants, the mutant creatures that were inspired by the spiritual rebellion of the sons of God in Genesis 6. So that's one. And because it comes from their dead bodies, that dead bodies are considered impure. That's one explanation. The other main explanation is that it doesn't necessarily mean that to everybody, to every Jewish person, but because evil spiritual beings are associated with death in the underworld, that means they're associated with dead bodies or corpses, and that's what impure could mean too.
Yeah. Because like technically this purity law stuff from Leviticus mainly is a very specific thing out of the Jewish covenant law of like the specific things you can do to become ritually impure. And one is like touching dead bodies. And so that's because it's like connected to the underworld and death, then it's like calling it unclean is just being like, this is related to death and it makes you impure.
That's right. Purity is to be in a state where I am able to be in proximity to life, goodness, beauty, and everything God wants for the human family. To be in an impure state means that I've been in proximity or touched something associated with death. And so in Leviticus, it's just a few things. It's like blood, bodily fluids, dead bodies, mold, skin disease. These render you, for a temporary period, ritually impure, which means that you're on the death side. But God has provided a way through the liturgies and the rituals of the temple and priesthood for you to enter a pure state again. So these are spiritual creatures associated with the dead and the underworld, the realm of death. And that's essentially what unclean should kind of signal for our ears.
So like to a Jewish person, a Jewish reader of this isn't just someone who's, I guess you have a category of like, man, if you're in an impure state, that's bad. I mean, it's not good. I mean, it's
not sinful.
It's not sinful, but it's like not a good condition to be in. But then you can go and you can change it. But here's an image of a person so like overcome with death and empowered by death that their impure state is like turned to 11. It's like no getting out of it. This person is too far gone.
Yeah. In Jewish society at the time, this would be somebody who's so on the margins, they're not even of sound mind and heart, and their bodies, their minds, their way of life shows it. They're likely homeless or they're likely a beggar. And so this is the first person that Jesus is drawn attention to. And Luke presents this is the first encounter he has after leaving that synagogue. It's really significant. And what's interesting is that whatever presence, right, is driving this man, it knows who Jesus is. Because it says, leave us alone. What business do we have with you, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come
You're talking about the unclean demon.
Yeah, starts talking. Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are.
Wow.
You're the Holy One of God. So this is ironic because the people in the synagogue were like, who is this guy? Wait, this is Joseph's son, right? And then here's this death spirit, and who knows exactly who he is.
Powers of darkness understand what would happen at the cross. Well, Paul gives us some insight into the way God shrouded his plan for redemption in mystery.
We speak the hidden wisdom of God in a mystery, which God predestined before the ages for our glory, which none of the rulers of this age knew. For if they had known it, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory.
Do you realize what Paul is saying here? If the forces of spiritual darkness had understood Jesus was coming to give his life as a sacrifice for sin, they never would have had him killed.
Even the disciples didn't understand why Jesus had come. Consider how they responded to Jesus when he told them he was going to Jerusalem to die. They were shocked. Peter even rebuked Jesus.
And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "God forbid, Lord, this will never happen to you." But he turned around and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan."
Jesus would have none of it. Jesus was on a divine secret mission.
The Old Testament leaves clues scattered throughout dozens of places about God's plan, but it doesn't spell it all out in one place. God didn't want the powers of darkness to know the plan. The intelligent supernatural evil beings knew that the prophesied Son of David had arrived. Matthew records an encounter.
2 demon-possessed men coming from among the tombs met him. They cried out, saying, "What do you have to do with us, Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?"
They recognized Jesus, but their words never indicate that they understood what Jesus was up to. The forces of darkness were duped into conspiring to kill Jesus. It was a divinely designed misdirection.
Intelligent evil, Satan, demons, the lesser gods, do not know everything. Only God is all-knowing, and He is on our side.
This is heavy irony there. So Jesus, challenges this spiritual presence and exiles him from the man. And the man came out of him, and everyone's amazed, and the message starts spreading. Then he goes to his friend Simon's mother-in-law, a woman, and she has a fever, so he heals her. And then the sun is setting, and anybody who was sick or with diseases were brought to Jesus, and he laid his hands on them, kind of like a priest, putting his hand on the animals, and started healing them.
And when we did the holiness video, this was so powerful for me, for you to point out that by touching someone sick,
yes,
makes you impure in the covenant law, in that liturgy. But here's Jesus touching the sick and making them pure.
Yep,
it's like the power is reversed.
Contagious holiness.
Or
contagious life. I mean, what holiness is holiness describes God as the unique one who's the source of life.
Right.
And so it's as if divine life is what becomes contagious through Jesus.
And so, in other words, a priest wouldn't come and lay their hands on someone sick, right? Because that would make them impure?
Correct. Yeah. No, Leviticus lays out the rituals for it, and people need to go through a waiting period and then have a washing before they can enter a state of purity again. Yeah. This is powerful stuff. The next sentence after he heals everybody is it just gives a summary of other demons were being cast out by people, and they were shouting, "You are the Son of God." So there's the Son theme again. But Jesus wouldn't allow them to speak because they knew that he was the Messiah.
Yeah.
So even right there, normally if you're like a hereditary prince, right, who's just come into your new throne, you go around with like heralds announcing it. And so look at the irony of the scene is Jesus has heralds, all right, as the royal cosmic son, but he's telling them to be quiet, and the heralds are like forces of evil. And the people who are watching all this are like, "Oh, who's this guy? I love his sermons," And then someone else is like, "Well, he's Joseph's son. Don't listen to that kid." It's really amazing. It's like this is the royal herald, but in this really upside down way.
And so there you go. The whole point is this is leading us to Jesus, as he is the human in whom divine and human, image of God, image of man, heaven and earth meet together in one person. And so the stories about him being tested in the wilderness is about he is the anti-Cain, and he's the anti-Nephilim, and he defeats the tester in the wilderness, and then he's going to go on to do everything he's going to do. But the point is that Jesus sees himself stepping into this drama between this battle of two realms. And that explains all of his exorcisms and why that was such a big deal to him. That used to just strike me as kind of cool, but also weird about Jesus is that, he was exorcism was such a big deal for him. But if you fit him into this story with this view of the cosmos from Genesis 1, it makes perfect sense why Jesus is going around doing what he's doing, and makes perfect sense of why the Apostle Paul wants to invite us as followers of Jesus to see that these two realms are very much still in operation as we look out at our world today, and that we are short-sighted if we only appeal to stupid humans for all of the stupid stuff going around us. Paul very much wants us to see that snake is still on the loose. He's still seducing us. And that we have the snake crusher, Jesus, to look to. That's the one who has delivered and will deliver us again.
The biblical story is giving us a really robust depiction of spiritual evil and how it's fully intertwined with human rebellion and evil. It's easy to reject a lot of this for modern readers because they associate it with, Satanism or witchcraft or something with a pentagram on it. And that's not what the biblical authors are trying to say. The twin spiritual human rebellion of Babylon is a political economic system. It's a cultural system. In the book of Revelation, Babylon is talked about as being the merchant of the whole world, the economic engine of the whole world, including slavery. And that's what gets brought down, when Babylon falls. And so the biblical authors want us to imagine that we're all inhabiting cultural systems that are participating in a human spiritual rebellion, but also on a personal level. When I entertain, when I dehumanize someone else as my tribe superior to you, you're less human, you probably don't deserve to be here. Which no one, well, maybe some people say that out loud, but none of us like to think that we think that way.
Yeah, but we all do.
But we all think that way a lot more at the time than we're willing to admit. And the biblical authors would say we are participating in dragging the world back into death and chaos.
The amount of death I will allow in the world around me and in others so that I can enjoy something.
Correct. Yeah.
When I stop and really appraise that, it's pretty startling.
It is startling.
And we all
disturbing.
We all do that.
That's right. So and this is, when you read the Gospels, this is what Jesus was constantly talking about.
Yeah.
This is why he didn't start a revolutionary war against Rome.
Because Rome was captive to something greater.
Yeah, he went out to the desert for 40 days to conquer the real enemy that was tempting him to take the kingdom of God over the world, but through violent force.
Yeah.
And he resisted that, and he went about confronting a spiritual enemy that had captured a lot of people's bodies and minds and hearts. When he was in the Garden of Gethsemane in the Gospel of Luke, and he's getting arrested, he calls it, "This is the time for the power of the dark." That's what he says. He allows the power of the darkness to overcome him.
We've still got so much to share and learn. I hope you guys are subscribed. I want to close us out with a quick prayer. Father God, thank you for this channel. Thank you for this series. Thank you for revealing yourself and giving us dirt creatures an understanding of you, this cosmic being. Father, let that learning about you humble us, to unite us, to understand that none of us have it all figured out and that we need you. We need your Son. We need your Spirit. We need you to unite us in our minds and in our understanding. I pray for this channel that it can be a light for those that are out there to understand you. I pray that you'll continue to open my eyes and open my mind and heart to the truths of your word so that I can share it with your people. Please, Father, send your Spirit. Help us. We need you. Remove temptation from us. Deliver us from the power of the evil one, and we will rejoice and glorify your name as it is glorified. It's in your Son's name that we pray. Amen.